there is so much trouble in the world. Excellencies, there is so much trouble in the world. Heads of government, there is so much trouble in the world. Heads of state, there is so much trouble in the world. And I say so because there is no simplicity in it. We get it. I come from a small island state that has high ambition, but that is not able to deliver on that high ambition because the global industrial strategy that we have has fault lines in it. Our ability to access electric cars or our ability to access batteries or photovoltaic panels are constrained by those countries that have the dominant presence and can produce for themselves, but the global south remains at the mercy of the global north on these issues. But it isn't only in that. We heard Al Gore just now speak about the difference in the cost of capital to those of us in the global south. And I ask us, how many more people must speak before those of us who have the capacity to instruct our directors at the World Bank?
Hello everyone, I hope you're all doing fine now. Let's watch this video of Motley, the Prime Minister of Barbados and one of the best leaders in the Caribbean. She goes out of order to defend Jamaica and the Caribbean in a world stage, which is very rare. Now, she has the audacity to lecture world leaders like Macron and Joe Biden over bad climatic policies. So let's watch this video, then have a quick discussion at the end of it. Thank you so much.
I've chosen the language of Bob Marley this morning, not because I'm an apostle of Bob, as you probably have realized by now, but also because he reminds us of the day-to-day reality of our people and of our citizens. And we have come to Los Angeles hopeful that we're not just going to engage in speeches, or we're not just going to engage in platitudes, but we go home to make a difference to people at perhaps the most difficult time this world has seen in 100 years. We have 3 global crises, and any one is sufficient to bring us down. The climate crisis hurts from you here in California in fires, to us in the Caribbean through the heart attack of hurricanes, and the chronic NCDs of water crises and droughts, or floods, depending on where you go. We fight the pandemic. And even as we talk about the pandemic, we need to start to qualify it, because we fight the COVID pandemic without realizing that the slow onset pandemic of antimicrobial resistance is already upon us, being fueled further by how we farm, how we treat each other with the abuse of antibiotics, and how we literally allow those things to flow into our environment and contaminate our water system. And as if that was not enough, we now fight the prices of food and fuel and fertilizer, knowing full well that the only destination thereafter is going to be a debt crisis and an economic crisis if we do not intervene to break the slide. My friends, how much more evidence do we need? You see men sailing on their ego trip, blast off on their spaceship, million miles from reality. No care for you, no care for me. If I could have sung it, you would have joined me. But I don't need you to join me in the words of this song. I need you to join us in the chorus of action that our people need, not want. Our people need immediate intervention. 6-week crops and 12-week crops is what is going to feed our people. We need to be able to shield them from the price of fertilizer that is making their efforts almost impossible. We need equally to recognize, as you heard Prime Minister Brown and Prime Minister Davis say already this morning, that the debt crisis is already among many developing countries. We simply do not have the fiscal space to respond to crises not spawned by ourselves, but spawned by others. And we are facing a double jeopardy. Our countries were those from whom wealth was extracted in order to build the developed world. Our countries were left at independence with no compact, no money to finance basic rights of housing and healthcare and education. And when we fought to do it, now we find ourselves having those efforts crowded out, literally, by our inability to be able to face and find the money because we are using it to recover from climate crises, not of our own making. Where does the double jeopardy come? That it is the very industrial revolution that the blood, sweat, and tears of our ancestors financed that is now causing us not to be able to respond to the needs of our people in the most basic of ways that humanity requires. My friends, there is so much trouble in the world, and we think we've found a solution, but we want to tell people only about financing after the climate crisis. We need to be able to prepare before the crisis so we can reduce what we have to spend by 7 times. We need to recognize that adaptation has no private sector follower because there's no return on investment in adapting to the climate realities. That is the function of the state. And therefore, the international community is required in the justice of the moment to help us prevent loss of life and property for a crisis we didn't create. We need to reform the international financial institutions architecture. How can we have an international bank for reconstruction and development that does not reconstruct and develop in today's world? Where is the reconstruction from the climate crisis being financed? Where is the reconstruction from the pandemic being financed? The post-pandemic recovery? Where is the platform for middle-income countries that house 75% of the world's poor? But because they're middle income, we don't remember that. Where is the climate finance being targeted to, justifiably and fairly so, when the numbers show that only 15% of climate finance is going to the climate vulnerable countries? I've not come here just to use words. Let us be practical. We have a duty to solve a few problems. And I think that the format of this meeting needs to change if we are to be able to see real progress and not simply to be part of the problem. We need to talk with each other and not talk at each other as we are doing in set piece speeches. We need to engage and see how we can make a difference in a real way. We have migrants coming not because they choose to come, but because it is their last option. They don't choose to leave who they love and where they love willingly. And when they come, we now know that we don't need to treat them poorly, because this year has shown that there's a dignified way to treat migrants. We've seen that in Europe. We need to see it in the Americas. And I don't place that burden on the United States of America alone. I place it on all of us, including my own country, because we cannot be part of the solution by simply talking from outside and not literally putting our shoulders to the plow. The International Organization of Migrants needs our support. And we need to make sure that as we reform the Organization of American States, that instead of it seeking to become a political player, it needs to become a player that simply brings opportunity to our people in the Americas, from Alaska to Chile. And how does that come? If we did nothing else in the next decade in the OAS, but to allow our people to become bilingual and trilingual, people under 18 and adults, then we would change the economic possibilities of this hemisphere in ways that we can't even contemplate. We need to ensure that if we fight this climate crisis in justice, then we fight it not just as small island developing states and developing countries calling for fairness for our nations, but we provide that fairness to our people. And how do I mean? We have taken a decision in Barbados that there can be no award of any contracts for renewable energy without taking into account the bounty that must go to our people. And therefore, accordingly, this year I announced that every rooftop that is owned by anyone in Barbados will have the right to have placed on it, as of right, not a choice, not a right to apply, as of right, photovoltaic systems from 2.5 kilowatts to 5 to 10 to 20. Why? Because we don't own individually the wind, the sea, and the sun. It is the patrimony of the nation. And if we are to move our people out of poverty, then we must use the bounty that is afforded to us through renewable energy, good jobs, but also good investment to allow our people to benefit. And we ask you to recognize that we must not only engage in platitudinous comments about what we can achieve with net zero. Net zero does not mean fossil fuel free. It means still that there will be 20% energy coming from fossil fuels. We know natural gas is that clean fuel. But as we do it, let us recognize that it is not possible to exclude those developing countries who have now the opportunity to finance their way to net zero simply because we want to keep the world in the construct of the old imperial order in which it is found. Whether it is a reform of the international financial institutions or whether it is moving ourselves into a new reality, we cannot continue to cement the inequalities of an old imperial order. And that is why I've come also to thank President Biden and Vice President Harris. For too long, there has been benign neglect. And the Partnership for the Americas, as well as the Climate Partnership Pact 2030, offers us a real possibility of hope. But it is up to each of us to keep and hold each other accountable. We are happy that coming out of yesterday, we made progress that we didn't see the day before. And we hope that tomorrow we will build on the subcommittees that will make a real difference on energy security, food security, and finance access that will mean that we can look our people in the face and say we have done right by you. We cannot achieve it overnight, but we are moving in the right direction. And we must also address the reality of exclusion, not only exclusion of individuals.
Now, good people, I've always talked about Motley, the Prime Minister of Barbados. And there is one character I love about her, the character of always being bold and speaking the truth. Now, talking of a woman who should actually, I think, in her capacity, she's able to lead the whole of the Caribbean. Now, I'm not just talking because she speaks the truth, but we've seen the qualities she has. How many Caribbean prime ministers are there? So many. But who has always talked on behalf of the Caribbean on any stage? It is Motley. Now, Motley once talked about the division among the Caribbean leaders, and she actually said that this is the time the Caribbean leaders, the Caribbean people should actually unite and speak as one voice. And she actually talked something, and it is sense. She said that when you go to Europe, they have actually one language they talk as one voice. That's why in Europe they have a president, like someone who heads the whole of Europe, someone who makes decisions for Europe. He meets with all the European leaders, then they come up with a consensus. Then they go ahead and speak in one voice. That's why we see Europe was able to conquer the world. And Motley said there is need for the Caribbean leaders to come together and form a caucus and maybe speak in one voice for the interest and for the benefit of the people of the Caribbean. Now, she went ahead in South Africa and she was talking about the good relationship that the Caribbean should actually have with Africa. Now, she actually said, and she actually talked about Nelson Mandela playing a big role in making sure that some other Caribbean countries got independence. And she talked about Marcus Garvey, who influenced most of our African leaders during his time, speaking truth to power. Now, brothers and sisters, I'm here to talk about the unity that should exist between black countries, black leaders, and the most countries that do not talk to each other. The countries that have enemies are black countries. Now, I'm here to understand that the Caribbean countries are not even in good terms with the others. Now, if you go to Jamaica, they are always not in good terms with the people from Trinidad. Did you know that? Now, they're all Caribbeans, they're all black people, but why the beef between the two? I'm here to understand why some Caribbean countries do not talk to the others. That's whatever Motley is speaking about. That's whatever she is talking about. We actually need people who can speak truth to power. We want leaders who can bring their people together and talk as one voice. This is why we've seen leaders in other parts of the world having to take up their troops to Haiti while we have the Caribbean community. Why is that possible? Does the Caribbean have armies who can help in the crisis happening in Haiti? That's whatever we want to see. We want to see a strong Caribbean which can talk as one voice. Now, this is the time the Caribbean can take the opportunity and unite with black people in Africa, where their ancestors came from. I've been sharing videos of one and only Ibrahim Traore, the Burkina Faso president, who is advocating for good leadership, and he has gone ahead to say black Americans, black diasporians, African Americans, African diaspora, please come back home. Please come back to Burkina Faso. This is your home. He went ahead and distributed tractors to farmers so that they can actually go and grow more food, so that when the brothers and sisters come, they can find a more stable country.
Is that called the International Bank for Reconstruction and Development only for the 20th century? At the IMF, which at least has been trying more than the World Bank? How many more countries must falter, particularly in a world that is now suffering the consequences of war and inflation, and countries therefore are unable to meet the challenges of finding the necessary resources to finance their way to net zero? This world looks still too much like it did when it was part of an imperialistic empire. The global north borrows between interest rates of between 1% to 4%. The global south of 14%. And then we wonder why the just energy partnerships are not working. Similarly, we ask ourselves if countries that want to finance their way to net zero and want to do the right thing can't get the critical supplies, will they not have to rely again on natural gas as that clean bridge? This is the bald reality. And we have come here to ask us to open our minds to different possibilities. We believe that we have a plan. We believe that there is now suffering the consequences of war and inflation, and countries therefore are unable to meet the challenges of finding the necessary resources to finance their way to net zero. This world looks still too much like it did when it was part of an imperialistic empire. The global north borrows between interest rates of between 1% to 4%. The global south of 14%. And then we wonder why the just energy partnerships are not working. Similarly, we ask ourselves if countries that want to finance their way to net zero and want to do the right thing can't get the critical supplies, will they not have to rely again on natural gas as that clean bridge? This is the bald reality. And we have come here to ask us to open our minds to different possibilities. We believe that we have a plan. We believe that there can be the establishment of a climate mitigation trust that unlocks $5 trillion of private sector savings if we can summon the will to use the SDRs, 500 billion of SDRs, special drawing rights, in a way that unlocks the private sector capital. We believe that that requires a change in the attitude of Congress. Because the agreement that establishes the International Monetary Fund requires 85% to change that agreement. And if the United States government has 17% of the quota, then it can't be done, Mr. Gore, without your Congress. Similarly, we accept that there was and must be.
I'm here to understand why we don't have a direct ticket flight from Africa to the Caribbean. It is so bad. This is the time the Caribbean government should unite with African governments and come up with a flight that can connect directly from Africa, from Ghana, from Nigeria, from Burkina Faso to Jamaica, from Kenya to Jamaica. You don't have to go through Canada, or you don't have to go through the US to go to our brothers, to see our brothers and sisters. This is why it is easy for them to regulate the flights that go in and out of Jamaica or the Caribbean. This is the time we should speak truth to power. This is the time someone like Motley should be enabled so that she can go ahead and spread the good news about the unity that should exist between the Caribbean countries. She has always spoken for the people of Jamaica, Trinidad, Tobago, Haiti, go ahead, St. Kitts, and all these countries. We've seen her when she was given a chance to speak at the International Climate Summit. She actually spoke for the people of the Caribbean with power. Actually, her speech was one of the best. And she said, do you know what? France, Europe, and the US should stop blaming Jamaica, the Caribbean countries, and African countries for the climate crisis that we are experiencing. It's because of their bad policies. It's because of the industrial revolutions in those countries and in those continents that the world is suffering climatic changes at the moment. We are suffering global warming just because of Germany, France, Japan, US. But where does the blame go to? We've seen them launching nuclear missiles day in, day out, which actually affect the climatic patterns around the world. But who talks about that? They only talk about the bad state of cars in Africa, of which they use then the second-hand cars. They dump them to Africa. They dump them to the Caribbean. So after all that happened, after all that dumping happened, they want to blame Africa, they want to blame the Caribbean. And I'm so happy we have someone like Motley, who has actually come out and spoken the truth at every point she has gotten the chance to. There is an interview that she did and it went viral when a journalist tried, an American journalist tried actually to say how corrupt the Caribbean is and African countries. And Motley was to ask. Motley was shocked because every time an interview is done with an African leader or a Caribbean leader or a black leader generally, the first question is corruption. That's whatever they always think of us. I know there is corruption in our countries, but this corruption exists because of their systems that they are trying to impose on our countries. We have puppet leaders. Their puppet leaders are the front line in corruption. The last time I checked, the US is as corrupt as African countries, as the Caribbean countries, but their corruption is very sanitized. They go ahead and sanitize their corruption in the media. Then they try painting Africa and black countries as Sodom and Gomorrah, as hell. And the last time I checked, they were telling their population not to travel to the Caribbean, more specifically Jamaica and Bahamas, because of insecurity problems. But go check well. Where are mass killings happening in the world? The biggest number of mass killings are happening in the US. Now, we should be fair. We should stand to be factual with whatever we say, as black countries and as black leaders and as the systems of the world, because they are always against us. We should rise. We have to fight the climatic changes, the global warming, for the better lives of our people and of the generations that are there to come. And us, however much we are going to do that, we should always remember to speak truth to power. There is need for black countries to unite. There is need for black countries to speak in one voice. When we speak in one voice, it will be so difficult for them to rule and divide us, for them to have puppets in our own countries. But when we are much divided, when we do not have the unity, it is so easy for their systems to unite and work against us. Jamaicans, Trinidad, Haiti, Tobago, Dominican Republic, and all that I'm not going to mention, Cuba, Antigua, St. Kitts, this is the time. Rise up, speak truth to power. If your leaders are having a problem with the West, or if your leaders are in collaboration with the West, the people themselves should stand and vote better leaders. Hold your leaders accountable. Let the Caribbean unite. Let Africa unite with the Caribbean, because we are brothers and sisters. It is time we realize that it is not going to be business as usual, because the systems are put there to be against us. This is the time. Brothers and sisters, let's hear whatever Mia Motley is speaking. She might not be that perfect, but the little truth she says, we should now learn to use that to better our lives and to better the lives of our black brothers in Africa and in the Caribbean. Thank you so much for having taken your time to watch this video. I'll actually refer you to go and do more research. Watch more videos of Mia Motley, because she has always been speaking about the same thing: unity, unity, unity. And after that, go take videos of Marcus Garvey and learn something. Learn something from Ibrahim Traore of Burkina Faso and Dr. Rikana. You are going to thank me later. Thank you so much. Have a good time.